Hey everybody, Melon here. Welcome back to yet another teardown video. Today we are going to be tearing down the Sprime PM1, the rather interesting sleeper mouse that came out of basically nowhere that's pretty much blown everyone away and is one of my favorite releases this year. But this mouse does have a very interesting kind of nature to it as being one of the first polycarbonate mice we've seen on the market aside from the Sora V2. I'm very interested to see what the inside of this mouse is actually going to be like. So today we're going to be tearing this mouse down and seeing what's hidden on the inside. Now, as always, whenever we do teardown videos, it's recommended to have a precision screwdriver set. Most of the screws inside the PM1 are rather standard, but it's best to have a precision set just in case you need a specialty size. And also it's a good idea to have something to keep track of your screws. I like to use an ice cube tray, but you can use pretty much whatever you want. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the teardown of the Sprime PM1. Alrighty, now in order to take apart the Sprime PM1, the first thing we're going to need to do is remove the base screws. Now there are 4 base screws on the bottom of the PM1. There's 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. However, they are under the stock skates. Now thankfully the Sprime does come with 2 sets of skates, but you will most likely need to remove a set and put on another set afterwards, so keep that in mind. But on the plus side, they are standard starhead screws, which is great to see. So we're going to go ahead and remove those first. Now the PM1 is definitely a little bit unique here because we can't take the PM1 apart just like we do with other mice. Traditionally, I just say put a little bit of pressure towards the back of the mouse and it will pop open, but as you can see here on the inside, there is actually a clip holding the back of the mouse to the base shell, so we need to remove this mouse from the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just kind of get a fingernail. You can still make a little bit of pressure on the side, get a fingernail underneath and just run your fingernail along the sides of the mouse. There is 1 or 2 clips on the side you'll need to pop off. And then once that's done, the mouse opens up from the top. Now it's very important to not pull the mouse apart from here because you will damage the back. Instead, you actually have to pull the back of the shell off and kind of wiggle it off this back, but you should be able to get it off after a little bit of pressure. It should come off. There we go, just like that. So just a TLDR, all you do is you take this and just pull it straight back and it should come off of this little lip towards the back here. Just be very careful. Just don't rip the shell right off because you will break this little piece towards the back. If you do break it, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't really affect the performance of the mouse in any way, shape, or form, but it's something I wanted to mention because it can be a little finicky. Now, you probably will have noticed this polycarbonate shell does have a lot of flex. Like you can see how much flex this material has. So it doesn't have a lot of rigidity like normal plastic does, but it is still relatively solid. So just be careful with the material. Don't ream on it too much. Don't squish it too much. Just make sure to try and leave it as untouched as possible. Now that we have the top, bottom, and the top shell disassembled, let's go ahead and take apart the top shell first, then we'll focus on the bottom. Alrighty, now in terms of the top shell of the PM1, there isn't really too much here. All we have is main clicks and we have these side switches here. Now the side switches are just clipped in pretty normally. You can actually push them. Oh, there you go. They come out of the shell really easily. They're just kind of loosely anchored into the side here. They come out very easily. So if you need to remove these, very simple to do so. Not really too much to talk about there. Next up, let's talk about the main clicks. Now, as always, when we're removing main clicks from units, don't remove these unless you absolutely have to. These screws are often factory tensioned, and if you over tension or break these screws, you will lose the rebound on your click. So be very careful when doing this. So if you do need to remove them for whatever reason, you just need to remove these 2 screws on each click. So we'll do that next. Now that you have those, all you need to do to get the clicks out is to take your fingernail and just put it underneath this back ridge here, and you can just pull the click right off and they pop right out of the shell. Nice and easy, just like that. Now again, be extremely careful doing this. If they don't come out naturally, do not force them. If you bend or over tension this area of the plastic here, you will lose the rigidity of the main click, so be very careful doing so. We'll do the same thing here. And they just pop out of the shell just like that. Very easy to remove. Just be really careful as always with all main clicks. Alrighty, that is all for the top shell of the Sprime PM1. Let's go ahead and do the base next. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and talk about the base of the PM1. Now the internal design of this mouse is actually rather interesting. This giant piece here is actually here for structural reasons. This is actually designed to prevent the shell from flexing. So as we can see, the shell has a lot of inward flex. This piece towards the middle here is actually designed to keep the mouse solid. Now they could have easily removed this piece to make this mouse even lighter, but they needed it for structural rigidity. So I'm glad they have that here. So first off, in order to do the rest of this teardown, we need to remove some screws. We need to remove this entire piece here. So in order to do so, we need to remove a screw here, here, and here. Again, be very gentle removing these. And then once you have that off, this entire piece comes off pretty naturally. However, there is a ribbon cable underneath here. Now this ribbon cable also runs under the battery connector, which is rather odd. I don't really think I've seen that before, which is kind of interesting to see. But on the plus side, this ribbon connector isn't a standard threader. It's actually one of those clip ones, which makes this a lot easier to take off. So all we have to do is we just have to go into the side of the mouse. We have to pull off the clip here and on the other side. Sorry, I'll try and show it, but it's really hard to show onto this mouse. Hold on, give me a second. There we go. We just need to just basically pull that little piece, that clip up, and then the ribbon comes right out, and there you go, you have your side buttons. Now you can remove this PCB from the inside, but it's clipped in, so I'm not going to remove it. But you do see the one white dot switches for these side buttons here. You could also, if you wanted to, remove the cable from here instead of the main clip here. It's really up to you, it doesn't really matter overall. Now lastly, we do also have a 3-pin battery connector here, which I will take off next. Again, as always, grab from the sides and just gently wiggle it off just like that. Now, interestingly enough, the board for the PM1 isn't actually anchored in anywhere else. It's actually just loosely fitted and holds in by the top USB-C port here. So all you have to do is grab from the sides and just gently pull the board straight up. Again, make sure you disconnect the battery first and your board will come off just like that. Now, you can also remove the scroll wheel as well, of course, which you can just pop off with a little bit of pressure and it just pop right out. And you can also take this out if you'd like. Now the board itself, as you can see here, is one of the most interesting boards I think I've ever seen in a mouse. Compared to a lot of the other mice we've taken apart on the Teardown series, this is one of the lightest boards, as you can see with all these hole punching here. It's also very fragile. Like, it'd be very easy for you to snap this board in half just because of all the things they've done to reduce the weight. So be really, really careful when handling this. It'd be very easy to damage this board. So here is our sensor. We have the Pixar 3395 MT6QU, we have the Nordic 54840 MCU, we have this weird pillar switch that I talked about in my review. Again, I don't know whose this is. I'm going to assume it's a Wano, but it could be wrong. We have the Omron optical main switches, and then we also have the TTC 9mm encoder, if I remember correctly, for the scroll wheel. A very interesting board, probably one of the lightest, most weight optimized boards I think I've ever seen, which is really cool to see here from Sprime. Really good job here overall. But that is everything for the base disassembly. Let's go ahead and talk about how to put this mouse back together. Let's start off with getting the PCB back onto the main board, and now this is going to be pretty straightforward. All you have to do here is take your scroll wheel, take the smaller end here, and you want to feed it into that little hole towards the middle here. So just very gently seat it in and just gently wiggle it in until it clicks into place. Now, once you do this, make sure you still feel a scroll point whenever you scroll it and make sure it still actuates the click. Again, pretty minimal things, but just make sure it works before you put it back together. Next up, let's go ahead and put this back into the board. Now, as I mentioned before, it's very important to make sure that this is in the right set. So if your mouse is turned off, you want to make sure it's set to the bottom. And if this is also turned off, you want to make sure that this little switch towards the bottom is in the off position as well. It is marked to make that very easy, which is great to see. If you put this in while this is on and this is set to off, you will break your switch and render your mouse inoperable. So be extremely, extremely careful when doing this. So make sure it's oriented correctly. And then what you want to do is you want to go ahead and just slap the board back in. Now you want to align the scroll wheel with these standoffs because that's the primary anchoring point, and that's pretty much all you do. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to do like this. And we're just going to go ahead and gently set it down. Just like that. And then make sure at this point, if it doesn't go down naturally, just reseat the board and make sure this is set to the proper thing. But it should naturally just go back into place. Make sure your USB-C port is lined up and you are good to go. Now at this point, just triple check, just make sure that this still works, just to be super careful. But once that's done, you can go ahead and reconnect the battery. We're just going to go ahead and reconnect that into this 3-pin here. And again, don't push from the top, push from the sides, and click that back into place. Now, next up, we have the ribbon cable, which is probably the hardest part of this entire teardown. So to make this really easy, while there's nothing on the board, go ahead and raise up the little stand here just to make it really easy for you to get the piece back in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab this piece. We're going to funnel it under or through the battery connector as we did earlier, how it was stock. And then once it's at this point, this is kind of awkward, but what you have to do is you have to basically just kind of gently feed it into this connector, just like that. And then once it's made connection, you can flip this over. I know, sorry, this is really hard to show on this. I apologize. It's a little difficult. Once this is in, you want to make sure this is sitting evenly. So the trick to doing this is going to be looking at that little blue connection towards the top there. You want to make sure that's sitting evenly. Once that's done, you can go ahead and press down both sides of the switch just like this, and that should seat it correctly. Just because this is a bit of a unique piece here, what I'd recommend is I would recommend just putting this back on the top. I'd recommend holding this down, turning your mouse on, and making sure your side buttons still actuate, making sure your scroll wheel works, making sure your clicks still work. Just make sure the entire unit works before you put the screws in, just because if this little cable isn't in all the way, or it's misaligned, or there's something on the inside, your side buttons won't function. So be really careful with that. Just turn it on, test it, just to make sure everything works before you go forward. All right, now that you've tested everything, you've made sure that the side buttons still work, you can go ahead and reassemble the mouse. So to do so, you're going to go ahead and put this plastic piece and you're going to reseat it onto its little standoffs, just like that. And then we want to go ahead and take your screws and reinstall those into the bottom of the mouse. So we'll go ahead and do that next. All right, and with that done, the base of the PM1 is finished. It's all reinstalled and we are ready to reassemble the top shell. So let's go ahead and do that next. Alrighty, so now we have the top shell of the PM1. Now this is going to be pretty straightforward, pretty similar to what we've seen on other mice. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna put the bottom of the click into this little hole here, and you wanna slide it in like this. And what you wanna make sure is that this little kind of hollow part, you want that to go over that little black connector at the top there. So you can see here it goes into the top, and then you line it up and you make sure it goes in just like that, and it should just line up like that, naturally fall into place. And then once it is roughly lined up, you can take your hand and just gently put a little pressure here and here to connect it onto its little standoffs. And once that's done, you can go ahead and put in the screws. Now, as I always say, be extremely careful with the screws. Do not over tighten them. The moment you feel any resistance from the screws, stop screwing. If you over tighten them, you'll lose the rebound on your clicks and they will be non-operational. So be very careful when putting these in. And we'll go ahead and do the exact same thing to the next main click. Go ahead, put it into the top, anchor it over, put it in like that, and press down just like that. And then we'll put in the screws. And then you can test to make sure that the screws aren't over tightened by just gently tapping the main clicks. You'll see how they naturally kind of bounce back. That's good, and that's how you want them to be. And lastly, we have these side buttons. Now the side buttons are basically just installed in these tiny little standoffs on the side here. So basically just shove them into, just put them back into the side of the mouse. And once you get them lined up, just gently press in here and here, and that will anchor them in. Again, these are very loosely anchored. They're held in by the side of the board here, so don't worry too much about them being a little loose. But once that's done, we are ready to go ahead and reassemble the entire mouse. Now, as I mentioned before, this rear part is going to be the trickiest part about this entire thing because it's a little awkward. Basically, what you need to do is you need to take the mouse like this. You need to kind of pseudo push this into the back. So once you get it lined up towards the back here, like this, if you want, you just put it like that. You have to push in from the back to get it to click in. And then once you feel a click, it's connected, and then you can go ahead and put the rest of the mouse back together. There's a couple clips on the sides, but everything should just naturally go back together. And then once that's done, you can go ahead and put in the base screws again. And then once that's done, you've successfully reassembled your Sprime. All you need to do is put back on your stock skates or your aftermarket skates, and you are all finished up. But surprisingly, despite this being a polycarbonate mouse, and despite it having some oddities in terms of this back clip here, overall the mouse is actually very easy to service. Sadly, there isn't a lot you can replace on the mouse itself because it is all soldered, but it is very easy to open the unit up and service it if there is something wrong on the inside, which is really awesome to see from Sprime. Again, Sprime just did a lot of things right with this mouse, and they continue to do a lot of things right with the PM1, which is really awesome to see, specifically when it comes to repairability and serviceability. But that is everything for the teardown and reassembly of the Sprime PM1. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you want to see more teardowns like this, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel, everything I'm doing here with the teardown project, and fund future teardowns from other mice available on the market, be sure to become a member over on YouTube. It's only $2 per month. I believe it's Canadian, and you get to directly support me and support the teardown project and everything I'm doing here on the channel. But thank you very much again for watching my teardown of the Sprime PM1. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next teardown video. Peace.